All right, very good. Well, I think we get started. Welcome to everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, perhaps for some of you. Great to be here today. My name is Steve Lanier with American World Services. Can everyone see the title screen, top strategies for making an acquisition? Perfect, very good. Technology is working. That's great. Thank you so much to Global Chamber, to Doug and Jem for organizing this event. We're very excited about that. Very excited to be talking a little bit today about looking at acquisitions in the US. And I will add Canada to that list as well for some of you. It might be interesting. Just a quick summary of our company for what we do. We've been in business about 25 years at this point. I say I still enjoy it when I get up in the morning, but doing this for 25 years, I still enjoy it. So I think that's a good sign. And our focus is really helping non-US companies in the US market, developing activities, mainly on the marketing side. So we complete different market studies, partner searches, and we identify companies for our clients to buy in the US market. So our clients come to us when they're looking for a company to buy. We go out and identify that company. And we really specialize in the smaller acquisitions, less than 10 million. I would say even probably 80% of our clients are less than 5 million or looking for a company less than 5 million in revenue. That's kind of our niche, which the big boys don't really like. And for us, it's a great project. So that's kind of our focus. We're focused on the marketing side, identifying companies. So I'm going to try to take for a few minutes 25 years of experience and condense that into about 20 minutes in terms of what we are doing and what we've seen and the trends we're seeing when you're looking at acquiring or entering the market through acquisition. The first item is really that it is a buyer's market right now in the US. And that's mainly because of a demographic trends right now. We're really seeing a lot of the baby boomers. This is the generation born after World War II. The baby boomers, which was an extremely large generation, is now entering their 60s, 70s, and are looking to retire, looking for an exit strategy. About 75 million Americans are going to be over 65 or over in 2031. That's about 22 or 23% of the population. The little chart there is probably a little difficult to read, but that's the percentage of over 65s. So again, we're seeing that those individuals, and a lot of people started businesses, are now looking for an exit strategy. They're looking to sell. And so that means that it's a very good time to buy a company. The choice of companies is quite interesting right now. And we've seen that over the last 25 years. When we would contact companies, before there would be a very low percentage that might be interested. And now we've seen that percentage gradually grow over the last number of years. So that means right now it's a very good buyer's market. And then the last point that I have, which is a more recent point, of course, is the current tariff situation. We planned this a little bit before what's going on right now, but obviously, with the current tariff situation, we're seeing a lot of interest with companies coming in to look at buying a company. My own advice would be don't come in to buy only because of the tariff situation, but it is definitely a factor that needs to be considered. But I would say use that as one factor, and if it makes sense to come in the longer term, then it could be a very good option to look at. But overall, when you look at sort of making an acquisition in the US, we suggest to really kind of weigh the advantages and disadvantages. And this is what I do with our clients on every project that we work on. I never tell our clients, this is what you should do, this is the direction you could go. I see my role as more of a advisor or therapist, if you want to use that metaphor. As a therapist, you kind of talk through the options. If you go this direction, here are the advantages and disadvantages. If you go this direction, and then in the end, our clients make the decision, weighing that, and we help them weigh that together, and then they make the decision in terms of which direction to go. So when you look at expanding in the US, entering the US as an acquisition, there are some real advantages, of course, to making an acquisition. I think one of the first is that you have a real rapid entry into market. If you have a going company, you have an existing client and vendor network, you have the distribution network, and there you're in control. And at that point, you can enter the market quite easily, and you know that you're in the market. Going in through a traditional looking for distributors or looking for marketing partners to work with, it can be a little bit up and down. It can be challenged, and it can take time to do that. Acquisition, come in and you have something that is rather somewhat certain, somewhat in place when you come in. And obviously, that's an extremely interesting advantage to have when you're looking at acquisition. It also gives you real credibility and trust with that, having that network in place. And for companies that are in a sector that requires high trust, high credibility, or you're looking at a closed industry sector, we see that a lot in certain sectors. For example, kind of the satellite, we did a project a couple of years ago in the satellite sector, very closed sector in the US. So when you're coming in from a closed sector, it can be interesting to look at an acquisition because that gives you the credibility and the trust within that sector immediately. So a lot of advantages for coming in and looking at an acquisition, something that can give real benefit for companies that are looking to enter or expand in the US market. But you have to sort of weigh that against some of the disadvantages. And identifying the right company is one of the most key elements. Do those companies exist that are the right partner for you? Are they open to being acquired? And are they open to really losing that control at this point and coming in? It's a question to ask. But as we see at this point, we're seeing more and more that question can be answered in the positive, given the current situation, demographic situation in the US. And then, of course, on the disadvantage, it requires a real investment. You either have to have the cash or you have to have the financing ready to come in and make that acquisition. We're coming in looking for a distributor, doesn't require that level of investment. So level of investment obviously is very significant or more significant than looking at a more traditional method to come into market. And then there's the cultural management complications, always a factor when you come to the US, but raised to a different level when you have to integrate two different corporate cultures. When you take over a going concern, a going company, you have to certainly look at the cultural aspects of really coming in and taking over and merging and putting those two cultures together. That's always a challenge. And again, always something when you come to a new market, always cultural concerns to look at, but it's at a heightened level when you're looking at an acquisition. And then, of course, when you take on a new company, there's always some potential legal issues. Fortunately, we have a top legal expert with us here, so I won't go into too much of that, but there are certainly ways to minimize that. And I would, of course, suggest that you have a lawyer to look at. And there we have Tom, who will be talking after me to look at. So I won't go into that anymore. Won't take Tom's thunder here. So disadvantages, yes. Advantages, yes. How do you weigh those two? And of course, after this, I'd be happy to have a talk with anybody after this presentation today, have an hour conversation about entering or expanding in the US. What are the different options, looking at an acquisition and weighing those advantages and disadvantages in more detail, if anyone would like to talk about that. The checklist that we use, I think it's important to kind of run through that. This is based, again, on 25 years of our working in the area, sort of what we've learned and how we approach looking for a partner, looking for that company to acquire in the US. And the first thing I would say, very important to do, Americanize your story and pitch. Now you might say, look, I'm trying to buy a company. Why do I have to come in and Americanize my story and pitch? If I'm coming in and buying, I'm the one in control. And I say, well, in the beginning, when you're approaching companies, we really want to show those companies that there is an opportunity here. And it's very easy to sort of scare companies away, or companies can drop out in the very beginning. The door can never be open to that perfect company that you may have found. And one of the ways, if you find those companies that are well targeted, that are maybe the perfect match, approaching them requires really coming in with an idea that, look, we are stronger together, that we can really do something interesting together. And that requires developing an Americanized story, coming in and showing them that you're unique, that you really have something to offer, that you really are a solid company if you're going to come in and buy another company. And to open that door, we have to give a good pitch. We have to give a good story to come in and talk with a company. I say oftentimes when we contact a company, we have about 15 or 20 seconds to really grab their attention before they say, I don't think it's for me. And so we really want to come in and offer something interesting, have this growth strategy in place to show how the two companies can be better together, and that you are not most likely a hedge fund trying to come in and slash and burn and sell it off for parts. Sometimes, that's a strategy. Most of our clients are small, mid-sized companies looking to buy small, mid-sized companies. And we have to show them, the US company, that, look, our client is here to acquire a company, to grow together. There's a strategy behind it. There's a logic behind it for the two companies to come together, and you can be stronger together. That's the story that we typically bring to the table when we approach a company. And if you can offer that story, then the US companies are more open to talking further, and that opens the door. And in the beginning, it's all about opening the door. So when we start a project with our clients, what do we start with? Americanizing the story, Americanizing the pitch, looking at the growth strategy. How do the two companies, does it make sense for companies to come together? What does our client have to offer a potential US company? And in the beginning, we have to approach them really with the idea of, we want to work with you. It really makes sense. We open that door, and then we can continue the conversation after that, and eventually become more demanding. And we whittle down the companies until we get to the top companies. So we also say, start with a large group of companies. We don't suggest going with the first company that you may have met at a trade show, or even going to a platform. Sometimes we use platforms. They can be quite limited in the results, but sometimes you find one or two companies, and we say, no, we really like to develop a very wide pool of companies to talk to, and then have a wide pool of companies to choose from. And then you sort of narrow it down to the top 2 or 3, and then you move forward with them. But that really takes some real preparation work. That takes some real activity to do. And it takes some follow-up and pushing with the companies. And so we really see that as well. And again, sometimes our clients in the beginning say, look, why am I pushing? I'm the one with the cash. I'm the one buying. And we say, no, in the beginning, it's for you to push. And we say it's like a relationship. If you're going to get married, you have to attract that person in the beginning, and you have to look attractive in the beginning. And then as you move on, of course, you get a little bit more demanding, a little bit more into the relationship before you actually get married. And so we say, yes, this is the process that we go through. We have a step-by-step systematic system. And if we're able to go through that step-by-step system, we have better results on the other side. More companies who are interested, more companies who are open, more companies to choose from, and we can find the top companies to really narrow down and then do a deal with. We also say in the beginning, first meeting, we do a lot of video calls, especially now after COVID. Everything is video call for the first meeting. But we say, obviously, you've got to come over, have a face-to-face meeting, meet the family, meet the company, look at the company. Extremely important, and multiple times to come over when you do that. And then we say also have an independent valuation done. When you get to that point, we say use an independent company to evaluate the company, and then you can use that as a basis of discussion. I'm not going to go through the step-by-step process. Tom will talk a little bit more about that. But this is our step-by-step process for the search activities to say, okay, how can you really find a good company that is open to acquisition, and find the top companies that are open for acquisition. You don't want any company. You want the top company that you can find. And we say, go through this step-by-step process, start wide, and then narrow it down from there. That's how we approach it. And then sort of what I would say are some of the key considerations. This, again, is based on 20-some years of working with our clients and identifying the acquisition partners. we say in the beginning, don't be too picky. You look at the criteria that you have. Obviously, you want to find companies who are well targeted, but we sometimes have clients that come to us with a long list of criteria. Here's what we want. Boom, boom. They have to be this, have to have this ability, have to be in this market, have to be here with this type of client. All these, and it's not bad to know what you want. At the same time, if the list of criteria is too specific, then it's a challenge to find companies who are going to be interested. And again, in the beginning, we say start with a wide pool. And then if you get in, you have a conversation, you realize they're not well targeted. Okay, you can put them to the side. But in the beginning, we say go wide, have conversations with anybody. And sometimes that company that really didn't look well targeted or maybe don't meet your criteria, once you sit down and have a conversation, you realize, wow, there's something really interesting here. Maybe we should go deeper. We've seen that happen many times. So we say, yes, it's good to know what you want. It's good to have the criteria. At the same time, keep it broad, keep it quite flexible, and then you have a better chance of really finding companies that are going to be well targeted. You move forward. Also, it's interesting. I've seen this happen a number of times. So now it goes into my little presentation here. Debt in the US is quite normal for companies to have. I look at some of our European clients and they've come in and said, oh, this is not good business. Look, this company has debt. And what's interesting, a lot of accountants, which our accountant said as well, in the beginning, if you're going to invest in the company, in the US, you oftentimes treat it as a loan. And then you pay yourself interest on the loan. And then if you're going to invest, you treat it. And that is very common in the US. And we have sometimes clients that come in and say, look at this debt. The company wasn't well managed. And we say, not necessarily. It could be a sign. But we've seen that happen. But it's also just how the Americans treat that, not as an investment, but it's as a loan. You charge yourself interest. It's a capital gain tax, which is lower than the traditional income tax. There's a lot of advantages to doing that. And so we see that quite often in the US. And we say, okay, don't be put off by that necessarily. Look a little bit more into what's going on. Then we see also when you're in that lower range, again, in that sort of millions of dollars in revenue range, we find that business owners, typically a family or an individual in terms of a business owner, they oftentimes have a little bit of an overvalued attitude towards their company. They oftentimes think their company maybe is a little bit worth more than what comes out in the actual valuation. Again, we've seen this many times coming in. And I say it's my baby syndrome. When somebody's been working with a company and developing a company for 30 years, and someone comes in, they do a valuation, they say, this can't be what it's worth. This has got to be more. And so often I say to our clients, expect to pay maybe a little bit more for what the valuation says. And then you get really good value out of that, goodwill, good value. And, in the end, maybe you have to pay a little bit more, 5% more, 10% more. Okay, maybe that's, not so bad to really have a good attitude from the company. Now, we have some clients, they really want to negotiate. Okay. But then, in the end, you might beat up on the potential target, and that might start the relationship with some negative feelings. So again, something to consider as you come in, and we've seen, and we try to prepare our clients for that when they come in. It's not always the case, but it happens often enough. So if we can prepare our clients for that, then if it happens, they're not sort of, oh, this is not right, or this is I want to get the best deal. All right, maybe come in with a little bit more, and you can start out the relationship with a very good rapport and relationship with your newfound partner in the US. Then we say as well, owners often like to keep a percentage, which I think is a very good thing. Then they have some skin in the game, so to speak, and they can continue to work with you for the long term to really develop that company together. Then maybe you buy out that last 20% in the next few years. So that's something that can be a very good thing, in my opinion, but is oftentimes happening. And then the last item, we suggest really using service providers that understand that SMEs and can work with smaller projects. Again, we've seen this happen. We have, when we work with our clients, we have a very good network of service providers that we work with that understand working with small acquisitions. I've seen, our clients come to us and they want to do due diligence, and they've got $100,000, $150,000 price tag for doing due diligence, and it's $1 million company. And so you really want to have vendors that understand working with the smaller acquisitions. That's why I love working with Tom. I'll have to admit, he understands that. And if you have the right vendors in place, and that's what we try to do. When we go systematically, we try to have all the right activities, find the right company, and then walk our client through that process until they sign a deal. And we use our network of service providers who can help do the valuation, due diligence, all the activities that need to be done, letter of intent. Tom will talk about that. If you have service providers that understand working with smaller acquisitions, it can be manageable, and you can save significant amounts of money rather than going with companies that say, no, I'm going to treat this like a big acquisition. So that's my pitch. That's my story. Again, be happy to talk with anybody that might have questions or want to talk in more detail about the specifics of going through and finding a company based on our experience. Our main office, as I mentioned, is in Washington, D.C. I go between France and Washington, D.C. I'm based in France. I'm in Washington at this point. I'll be in Washington till early May, and then back in France with our partners on that side. We work with a lot of different groups, chambers of commerce, and just was in last week working with some of the DBT, Department of Business and Trade offices. So I kind of go back and forth, but happy to have any conversation with someone that would like to talk more. So I'm going to stop there. And if I can stop sharing my screen, and now we'll transition over to Tom Thorelli. I have to say that I've known Tom for many years at this point. We've worked together many times, and Tom will talk more about the legal aspects of completing an acquisition in the U.S. So let me see if I can stop that.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Jemima, for inviting us to participate in this global chamber event. It impresses the living daylights out of me that there's a global chamber and that there are people from all over the planet that participate. I think it's a wonderful idea, a wonderful concept, and hopefully it helps to bring people together more and more. We've been a member for 3-4 years and have gotten some very interesting and valuable contacts through being a member. So I'm supposed to talk about the legal aspects of buying a business in the United States. First, I want to tell you who it is that's speaking so that hopefully you get a feel for where I may be coming from. Thorelli and Associates is a small 5-lawyer law firm located in Chicago. And all we do is work with small to medium-sized foreign companies doing business in the United States, helping them take advanced preventive action to minimize their exposure to legal risk when they do business in the U.S. And so what we do is we work in 5 main areas. One is intellectual property. Most of our clients being small to medium-sized, they need to distinguish themselves quickly and easily from their competitors. And often enough, that's with technology, and that technology needs to be protected, and for sure, their trademarks. Anybody that's listening that doesn't understand the importance and value of trademarks, I'd be happy to have a side conversation with you and beat you up until you do. To me, it's registering trademarks, especially in the United States, in my view, is the cheapest way to enhance the value of a business, especially if somebody comes knocking on your door at some point in the future about buying your business. If you have not registered your trademarks in the world's largest market, okay, maybe it's not. Arguably it is. It's going to have a negative impact on how they view your business. Just like when you offer to buy a business in the United States, you want to see what kind of intellectual property your target has. Even if it's primarily a distribution outfit, you want to know that they've gone about protecting their intellectual property. So we do a lot of work in that area. Contracts is the second area, all the way from what we're going to talk about here in acquisitions, but distribution agreements, license agreements, employment agreements, R&D agreements, NDAs, left and right. We spend more time on contracts than anything else, and helping clients think strategically about what they're doing in the U.S. Many people hope to do business in the U.S. It generally doesn't work. The work that I'm talking about, what we do, is something that I've been doing for 40 years. Yes, it does make me an old man, but it also hopefully makes me somebody that has some experience that could be of value to you. Steve is more generous than I am. He's offering you an hour for free on a Zoom or Teams call. I'll be happy to spend 45 minutes with you to answer your questions, to address your interests, and maybe answer even questions related to a particular target that you have in mind and how to go about negotiating an appropriate deal with them. The third area is setting up companies. In all likelihood, it would be prudent, whether it's an asset deal or a share purchase in the United States that you might be interested in. It's probably a good idea to consider setting up a U.S. company to serve as the vehicle through which you buy the U.S. target. Liability is certainly one of them. Tax may be another. I want to emphasize that our firm does not provide tax advice. We work with 2 or 3 outstanding tax accounting firms, most of them small to medium-sized, that have great experience with working with foreign companies doing business in the U.S. So setting up the right kind of company, and I think everybody that's listening in knows what state to set that company up in. And if you don't, ask me. There's only one really serious state to take into consideration if you're a foreign company entering the U.S. market. I'm not talking about an American living in Podunk, Kentucky, who wants to open up a gas station. They should set up a Kentucky company. But foreign companies entering the U.S., there's really only one state. And again, if you don't know what state that is, then you probably shouldn't be on this webinar. But I'll be happy to answer that question at an appropriate time. So that's the third area. The fourth area is immigration. And even if you acquire a company in the United States, you got to integrate that company. Steve talked about cultural differences as being a disadvantage or an issue to address. It sure is. Those that think that they can acquire a U.S. business and say, gosh, this is great, you're ready-made, you've got the distribution network, all we're going to do is to add our products to your distribution network and everybody's going to be happy. Yay. You got to motivate these people to do their job. And well, we've agreed on this and that and the business plan and the marketing plan. Yeah, that's with the owner of the business that you bought the business from. But how about all the other people that are working in the organization? Are they all on board? So immigration is a real thing to consider, sending somebody pretty high up in the organization. And if not, maybe somebody who's has all the technical skills that are necessary to help integrate your products and technology into what's taking place in the U.S., if that is your objective. And that takes a lot of planning. One of our lawyers and 3 paralegals do nothing but work on business immigration. And so have that in the back of your mind as you move forward with discussions concerning an acquisition here in the United States. The last area is product liability preventive management. If you're buying a business, that's going to be part of the due diligence process that I'm going to talk about here in a couple of minutes. But if you're bringing products into the United States or even technology, software, etc., you want to take advanced steps to minimize the risk of anybody getting hurt with whatever it is that you're bringing into the United States and also whatever it is that you're acquiring. Many of you know that Bayer, the massive German company, bought Monsanto a few years ago and knowingly inherited a risk concerning Monsanto's product Roundup. Well, it's turning into becoming a much, much bigger problem for Bayer than they initially thought. And I think part of that may have been their eagerness to buy Monsanto. Maybe somebody else was bidding as well, but it's ending up costing them multi-million dollars. So you got to be really careful and intentional when you buy a US company. So that's who we are. For a lot of the work that we do, we offer fixed fees. I'm currently sitting in Brussels because I'm on a business development trip here. I was with Steve in the UK last week, in the Netherlands, Monday, Tuesday, in Brussels today and tomorrow, and then I fly home on Friday. So let's talk about legal aspects of buying a business in the US. First, I want to bore you and maybe repeat some of the issues that Steve has spoken, but more from a legal standpoint. You buy a company in the US, there's got to be a real good reason to do so. Sometimes it's just for manufacturing support. Usually it's because of the ready-made market. They have a distribution network with customers, etc. And that can add, you can hit the ground running. It speeds up the whole process of entering the US market and saves not only a lot of time, but often a whole lot of money. A little example. We worked, and I'm not a smart guy, so I can't give you the technology here, but somebody in the film business many years ago noted that the US film, whatever it is, photographic film, was all analog, and it was slowly becoming digital. But the US was way behind. But they knew that the US had a major appetite for taking on digital. They knew that there was a target in San Diego that had a very tight relationship with Kodak that owned 90% of that particular film market, and therefore had a fantastic distribution network. The owner of that business in San Diego was getting old and really had not followed with the times and was not really up to speed with the fact that that ready-made market really wanted digital instead of analog. Our client bought that business, and all they wanted was the customer list for $300,000. That's sort of free in the grand scheme of things. They got over 1,000 different potential customers and introduced their digital photographic technology and made millions and millions of dollars. So the idea here is you may have something that you can introduce in the US through already existing distribution network. It's not necessarily the way to go about it, but it certainly can speed things up a great deal. Steve talked about the purchase price. I'm inclined to agree with Steve. You don't want to be cheap about it, yet at the same time, Americans are greedy, shall we say. They want as much as they can possibly get, and generally start their negotiations pretty far from what they're willing to accept. And therefore, make sure that you retain more margin when you make an offer than you normally would if you were offering to buy a business outside of the US, especially in Europe. So the American starts here. If you start here, you're going to have a heck of a time getting the Americans to reach here. You're going to have to come up more. So give yourself more negotiating room when you make an offer. And it's got to be very, very specific as to what it is that you're paying for and what you're going to get for it. But normally, American companies are for sale and not necessarily cash on the barrel. namely, they're prepared to accept extended paying terms, earnouts, So keep that in mind as you make your offer so that you can help the U.S. company to finance the purchase. We generally like the idea of trying to keep the seller in the business from a reputation standpoint, from a knowledge standpoint, and also as a means of reducing the purchase price, because you will pay that person a salary and perhaps a little bit of an inflated salary, which will be good for them because they can extend the tax impact of that portion of the purchase price so that they don't have to pay the taxes the same year that they sell the business. There are lots of these sort of tricks of the trade that based on, these 40 years of doing acquisitions, we are continuously engaged in acquisitions, largely because it is an attractive way to enter the U.S. market. The acquisition of a company in the U.S. will facilitate any immigration. Some people have a real desire to enter the U.S. market. And as a result, or rather move to the United States. Buying a U.S. company is one of the easiest ways to secure a visa because, of course, you're spending a lot of money buying a business in the United States, and you need to be there, at least in a transition, for a transition period. So seeking normally an E-2 treaty investor visa would be relatively straightforward to obtain, especially given the screws have been turning on the immigration front for over 20 years. I mean, it used to be you could say, hey, I've set up a U.S. company and give me a visa so that I can come in and employ half of America. And the Immigration Service would say, great, wonderful, come on in. Last 20 years, no. Why? Because there's so much fraud. It's not just we want to keep people out. It's as that people said, hey, I'll come in and I'll employ half America, and they disappear. It's easy to disappear in the United States. The thing is that people get visas. They come in, they get a social security number based on that visa. They get a driver's license. They start paying taxes. Their visa runs out. They do not leave. There are tens of millions of people in the United States that don't have visas. So you buy a company, you get a visa, and you got a company. So if you're really interested in moving to the United States, buy a company. But that's not really why we're here. So avoiding tariffs, for goodness sakes, buy a U.S. company. You don't pay tariffs on products that are made in the United States. I mean, if you buy a U.S. company that is importing all of their merchandise from China, you're not going to avoid that problem. But nonetheless, if the products are made in the U.S., that's a good one. And for those of you that are confronted by the tariffs issue, what a number of our clients are doing is setting up U.S. companies, if they don't already have one, and starting to sell in the U.S. through their U.S. company and importing their products to their U.S. company or through their U.S. company at cost plus, instead of selling what costs at 50 but is normally sold at 100. They set up a U.S. company, and instead of selling at 100, they're selling at 55. Perfectly legal. And it reduces the tariff burden by 50%, essentially. So now let's talk a couple of minutes about some of the disadvantages before we get into the nitty-gritty of an acquisition. One of them is the cost. Sellers in the U.S., they inflate frequently the purchase price. And Steve and I have worked on a number of dossiers over the years where the buyer and the seller could never really reach agreement. So that's one. It being a bad match, namely the vision of the seller and the buyer are not aligned. The seller remains engaged, but not for the benefit of the foreign company. And to me, that's the foreign company's fault. You need to get aligned, truly aligned. So that's an important one. Another disadvantage, hidden liabilities or claims from third parties. It's really, really crucial that you engage in-depth due diligence of your target in the United States. We'll talk briefly about that, but that's a disadvantage if you don't uncover them. But we can talk about how to deal with that as well. Another disadvantage is that there may be an exodus of employees, namely you buy the company and key employees leave. We've seen that happen. They leave, and what do? They set up a competing business, and they know all the customers. Also something that needs to be addressed in the documentation concerning the acquisition. And so all of the key employees need to be under contract with the company that include covenants not to compete that are enforceable in the state, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, so the risk is that they leave and they set up a competing business. Another disadvantage, the time element, first of all, the distance, and the time element for integration and management of the U.S. company. Again, those that hope that by buying a business in the United States that they're going to hit the ground running and we'll let them manage the business in the U.S. normally are fooling themselves. You know, when we do distribution relationships, the travel to the U.S. begins when you sign up a distributor. It begins when you buy a company. It doesn't end. It begins then. And then the last one is the lack of legal expertise. I want to stress that not only for acquisitions, but doing business generally in the U.S., use a lawyer before you do business in the United States. It's one of the big distinctions. It's one of the reasons why there are well over 1 million lawyers in the United States. We're only a little bit over 300 million people. So 1 in 300 people has a lawyer. And you can be 100% certain that anybody and everybody that you do business with in the United States has a lawyer and probably talks to their lawyer relatively frequently, and certainly when they're discussing doing business with a foreign company. So if you want to even out your discussions and negotiations with your American customer, American partner, distributor, whatever, get an American lawyer. It's going to cost you one whole lot less money than it would be if you wait until there are problems. And then all of a sudden, OMG, now we got to spend a ton of money trying to solve or correct something that's gone wrong. And if you say, yeah, that's easy for you to say, but you're just trying to sell your services. No, what? Of course I'm trying to sell my services. But this is really good legal advice. There are over 1 million lawyers in the US. Choose one. Choose one that has experience with working with foreign companies doing business in the US. Offer some free time to get introduced and understand your situation, your circumstances, and what you want to accomplish in the US, and offers fixed fees for a lot of the work that they do, and hopefully what are perceived as reasonable fees. That's that. Now, let's talk for a little bit about the whole process of an acquisition. First of all, to me, well, maybe you've got Steve. You want to make sure that your contract with Steve is airtight and protects you. Good. Thanks for smiling, Steve. The second thing is an NDA, likely a non-disclosure agreement, confidentiality agreement, that is prepared that in a way that's enforceable under U.S. law. Why? Because the target is in the U.S. meet so many companies that have NDAs under Dutch law, under English law, et cetera, with disputes resolved at home. Yeah, but where are your secrets going to be stolen? In the United States. By the way, be careful with a target. If the target's a competitor, they might, oh yeah, we're interested in selling. Tell us all about your company. No. Don't tell an American target all about your company. They may be interested in getting as much information as they can, and then, oh, no, we decided we're not for sale. But thanks for all that information that we're going to use in competing with you. It's not like Americans are unscrupulous. No, some are, unfortunately. And that is a political comment. But no more political comments. So an NDA is probably in order with your potential target, if nothing else, to make them feel comfortable. Then, once you get into discussions and you start reaching a level where the purchase price and how you're going to pay and who's going to stay and the payment terms and these kinds of issues are starting to clear up, you should have your lawyer prepare what's called a letter of intent. And the real purpose of the letter of intent, there are two purposes. One is to avoid spending a whole bunch of money on due diligence and preparing transaction documents, not knowing what the dang basic terms of the deal are going to be. That's one. And the second is to get an exclusive right to negotiate with the target. Namely, you don't want to spend your time and money finding out all about this potential target, worried that some third party may come in and whoosh, grab that target while you're spending this time and effort in trying to get to know the company and all that. So that's the letter of intent. That can usually be prepared from somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. It depends on how detailed it is. Sometimes it's very, very brief because the acquirer, namely you, just wants this period of exclusivity. Well, fine. Then it might not even cost $3,000 to put together. Then comes the big expense normally in acquisitions, and that's what's called due diligence. There's legal due diligence, and then there's financial due diligence. And you talk to accountants that are experienced in this concerning financial, tax, all that stuff, and accounting. And then what we do is legal due diligence, investigating intellectual property, contracts, employment, environmental, real estate, you name it. What we do is then get as much information as we can from the target, and that due diligence can cost $5,000. It can cost $40,000. Much has to do with how old the target is and how well organized they are and how responsive they are to our due diligence requests. Because often enough, we have to go back and back and back and ask for more information. It can take forever to do that. So due diligence is absolutely critical. And you might say, well, we don't need that as long as the seller makes a whole bunch of representations and warranties concerning the status of the company. And we buy the assets instead of the shares. I'm getting into more detail than we have time for here. But that is making a big mistake. You've got to know what it is that you're buying. It's absolutely crucial. Plus, then, in the acquisition document, the seller makes a whole bunch of representations about the status of the company and warranties about anything that might go wrong that that the company might otherwise be responsible for. And you prepare the definitive agreements, the asset purchase agreement, the stock purchase agreement, some employment agreements with the key employees. There are a bunch of closing deliveries and all that kind of stuff. There are some issues. Here's a real distinction between acquisitions in the US and much of the rest of the world, at least with many of the clients that we've worked with. And that is, there's such thing as a holdback. Namely, you agree to buy the business for $10 million, and so let's say it's a cash transaction. So you pay them $9 million and you hold back $1 million for a year and a half, as long as you can negotiate, so that whatever these representations and warranties that the seller has made actually hold true. And if they do not hold true, you've got $1 million that you owe the seller, but can be used to defray these liabilities of the target that were not made clear to you when you bought the business. So holdback, but that holdback needs to be introduced in the discussions shortly after the purchase price is agreed to, not months later in the transaction documents. That's a big one. Then you've got what's called indemnification, namely whereby the seller, even after you've bought the business, agrees to defend you in the event some third party makes a claim for what took place in the business before you bought it. That's a hotly negotiated issue. And it's one that sometimes holds things up for a while. But we recommend that that be for at least 12 months, maybe 24 months. And for some particular targets or issues, those representations and warranties can last for 5 years. And of course, fraud, there is no limit. I mean, if they deceived you, you can chase after them forever. When somebody sells their business to you and they're leaving the business, make very sure that part of the acquisition includes a covenant not to compete, so that you don't sell the business and then months later, oh my goodness, the person that we bought the business from is now in competition with us. And they've got the established relationship with the customers and a new supplier from overseas that sells at half our price. That would be most unfortunate. You can't have covenants not to compete for a real long time, but almost all states will enforce at least 3 years when you're buying a business from someone. We've only got 5 minutes left. Let's open up the floor to questions. If you have any special questions, in-depth ones, let us know, and we'll be happy to set up a team or Zoom call with you later.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Steve. Does anybody have a question? Feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead. Ideally, raise your hand, but we really only have time probably for one so that we can wrap up in time.
Hello, Doug. I'm having one question. Hi, Tom. It is really very insightful session. This is Yogesh. I have actually clicked on the box also. Does the recent tariff wars which are going between India and US and China and US going to impact the acquisitions game in between? That's my question.
That's an enormous question. To me, what's taking place right now would lead me to encourage foreign companies to buy U.S. entities so that you're viewed in the U.S. as a local U.S. entity. Is that going to improve your import of goods from China or India? Who knows? Probably not today, but there are exceptions. People, unfortunately, another political comment, too many companies are getting on their knees. And as a result, things are going to change industry by industry. But to me, the quickest way to establish a presence in the United States today is by buying a U.S. company or investing in the U.S., which is going to take a whole lot more time to achieve the results you may be seeking.
Just generally, the macro question, I guess, is are you seeing kind of a flood of activity right now in this area? I guess it's part of the reason why we're having this conversation, right?
Yes, well, we're seeing an uptick in interest in acquisitions, but people they're not scared. They're just kind of perplexed and wondering, the dial is shifting left and right from day to day. And as a result, many of them are more interested now than ever before. But what they're doing now is launching the process, engaging people like Steve to investigate potential targets.
Thank you. Steve, could you make some closing comments? And then I'll come back to you, Tom, for the same thing, and then we'll close the room. Thank you both.
Yeah, no, I think, as I mentioned sort of before, I would say that the tariff situation makes it very interesting. It's another factor to consider, but that should not be the only factor. There should be other long-term considerations to look at. But yeah, it's a real opportunity. It's a buyer's market, but you have to go step by step and engage good service providers to avoid the pitfalls from our experience. And so hopefully this gives some food for thought today, and happy to answer other questions and find that partner and live happily ever after in the US. We can help go step by step. So thanks again.
Thank you, Steve. Both of these guys are just so expert, so experienced, so professional. It's just, this is what we look for at Global Chamber, people we can count on and trust. And so thank both of you for that. Tom, any comments in conclusion?
Well, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not paid now, so I can still make it short. It really boils down to commitment. If you're not committed to doing business in the U.S., then of course don't go and buy a U.S. business. It's gonna take time, and it's gonna be well worth it if you do your homework and are committed long term. Thank you very much, Doug, for inviting us.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Catch Steve possibly at our next Global Chamber Chicago meetup on Monday, and we have a variety of other activities going on this week. I think about a dozen or so events, including in I think about an hour or so, we have our monthly book author series where we're speaking with a very global book author. And then we also have a meetup in 4 hours, Global Chamber, Salt Lake City, Intermountain West, Denver, Rockies, kind of that whole region. And we're going to be talking about immigration, actually. We have a university, Utah Tech University, and probably my own alma mater, University of Utah. But Utah Tech is going to be talking about what the impact of what's going on is happening on international initiatives with the school, and also on immigration with the students, and what that's meaning. Well, we probably won't get too much into the long-term impact. That's more political than anything else. But at least certainly there's a lot of people going through a lot right now, and Tom, that as well. It's the attorneys at least get paid for it, but there's a lot of heartache and a lot of challenges going on right now, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that. For business owners too, it's getting harder to find people, so it's really it's a challenging but also very opportunistic time if we keep our minds open to the different opportunities. And I think both of you gentlemen referred to that, is that, yeah, it's tough, but it's also amazing in terms of what's going on. And times of trouble, times of challenge are times to make money. And so let's do that, but also stick to our values, and hopefully through those values pull us back together as a country and as a world. Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you so much.
Amen,
Bye,
Doug.
bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim, for pulling this together.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.